In a postmodern secular society, which is what we are in Canada, the two institutions that carry the value of respect for life for the society as a whole are medicine and law. Law says you must not kill, and medicine says we care always, we cure where possible, and we never kill. Well, that's exactly what we're going to change.
Welcome back to The Arena. I'm Michael Coren, and that was Margaret Somerville, a very impressive woman. I'm very fond of her indeed. I wonder how she's reacting to this new survey that reveals that the vast majority of Canadians seem to support euthanasia, at least to a certain degree. I think it's rather like same-sex marriage, that it may well be considered a non-issue in coming years, but they are very different issues indeed. Christina Alaimo from Campaign Life is here to discuss, almost certainly in a state of profound shock. This must worry you, this survey.
I mean, it does, because the article opened with saying Canadians are overwhelmingly in support of assisted suicide, and then proceeded to say, well, we just polled about 1,504 people, which I found, you know, profoundly interesting. And that I think that I'm not sure how the proportionality thing works for polls, but it seems kind of a little bit of an overstatement given the scope
numbers
of the poll.
aren't huge, but I'm sure if the 1,500 and so on polled had said they were overwhelmingly against euthanasia, you'd say, hey, this is wonderful.
I might. Yeah.
It's a fair number. I was surprised how few people were. I mean, it was a very small number. I think less than 20% who were heavily opposed.
Yes.
Now, those who strongly supported it, about a third or so, but those who say yes in some way, I mean, the vast majority seem to say, and I think that does reflect Canadian opinion, that in certain cases, now they will be appalled at what is going on in the Netherlands, where people seem to be euthanized against their will, or people who aren't particularly ill. But I think that there has to be some sort of change. Is there a possible middle ground? Is there a way of having some sort of legislation that allows people who are suffering, who really say, I don't want this anymore, to end their lives with some help, but also guard those who are vulnerable?
I'm not entirely sure if there is a middle ground, because I think suicide is suicide and homicide is homicide. And I think you mentioned the #1 issue is suffering. And I think that has to be addressed. And there was a quote in the article that said that this is going to open up a greater conversation about palliative care in Canada, which I think is severely lacking, because I think even general common sense, when one is in excruciating pain and is terminal and you can't see past the pain, you have a certain mindset. Now, as soon as that pain is taken away, even minimally, your entire mindset changes. And I think that is illustrated by the polls. And so that brings in another topic of consent. In this topic of such nuance, which the Angus Reid representer calls it, says it's a nuanced topic, when consent is so nuanced, which by that it means so gray, how can you definitively have any kind of middle ground? It's always going to be a slippery slope.
You mentioned suicide is suicide, and let's be candid, a lot of the opposition, not all, but a lot of the opposition to euthanasia comes from people with a strong Christian conviction, and I admire that very much. Not all of it, but a lot of it. The Catholic Church, for example, and there was a time when suicide was regarded as a terrible sin. Mass could not be said for those people. They couldn't be buried in sacred ground. That's all been changed. So suicide is suicide, but the Church is less medieval about self-slaughter than it used to be.
I think, though, in terms of, let's say, the Catholic Church, I myself am Catholic. I don't think that the idea that it is a very grave matter has changed. I think that pastoral initiatives towards those who contemplate suicide or those family members who have been left behind have changed. And I think that the Church has come out and said, well, we cannot definitively say that a person is either in heaven or in hell.
The keynote is compassion now.
Yes.
I think it probably was judgment, it's now compassion, which is one to move forward. The point I'm trying to make is that, look, there are some very compelling cases here. There are others. There are cases where young people have said they're depressed, they want to end their life, and people have said, yes, you should be able to. I find that abhorrent. I think most people would.
That is, yeah.
But there are others where people really have, they know there's only a few months to go of their life, and they are suffering, and maybe the pain can be controlled, but with so much morphine and so on, they don't really know what they're doing, and it's terribly traumatic to them and to those around them. And in those cases, I think if you could guarantee they were the only cases, I think you'd have overwhelming support for euthanasia. My fear is I don't believe you ever can. I think once the door is opened, there will be abuse.
I think so too, but even in those cases, there is a Quebec ethicist, which is ironic, Dr. David Roy, who consistently says that killing the pain is important, not killing the patient.
Yeah.
So even in those cases where it is super compelling, you know, they only have a few months to live and they're going to just be hopped up on drugs anyways. I think the point is that your health does not determine your value as a person and that compassion is needed until the end. And I don't think a needle is compassionate.
We haven't got too much time left, and it's a very harsh question. But
yes.
Some people see the socially conservative movement as being very concerned about those before birth and those at the end of life, but they wonder if there's much concern for those people in the middle.
Yes.
Is that a fair criticism?
I think that it is an unfair criticism. I think that the general sentiment generated by the media would propose that ideal of pro-lifers, but I think that once you get to know pro-life people like Dr. Margaret Somerville, like myself, who's in an ethics program, we really care about people, period, and their lives. And I would say that my experience is that that is simply not true.
Yeah, I think there are some people in the pro-life movement who are like that, and you know them as well as I do. But I think for the majority, the good people who care, who just care very much, and should be listened to. Whether people agree with you or not, that's not the point. You should be listened to. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.